Create and modify brushes. Create and modify brushes. How to create and modify brushes? By the way, you can create brushes that apply paint to images in a variety of ways, and you can to select an existing preset brush and a brush tip shape, or create a unique brush tip from part of an image. And you can also choose options from the brush setting panel to specify how the paint is applied actually. And do not and be careful. By the way, symmetry painting is not supported with live tip brushes, and choose a normal brush for symmetry painting. Like this screenshot now. Adobe Photoshop symmetry painting is not supported, by the way, with live tip brushes, and you should click more information for more information now, and you should click OK or if you would like to show any more information now. And what about brush setting panel overview? Brush setting panel overview is meaning the brush setting panel lets you modify existing brushes and design new custom brushes, and the brush setting panel contains the brush tip options that determines how paint is applied actually to an image. And the brush stroke preview at the bottom of the panel shows how paint strokes look with the current brush options. Like this image now explain for you the brush setting, and we have A and B and C. Brush setting panel in the left side and the brush panel in the right side, and A is meaning locked and unlocked, and B is meaning selected brush tip, and C is meaning brush stroke preview, and D brush panel. How to display the brush panel and the brush options? Display the brush panel and the brush options in Photoshop. We have steps. Step number 1. You should choose Windows, then you choose brush setting, or select painting or erasing and toning or focus tool, and click the panel button on the left side of the options bar. Step number 2. You should select an option set on the left side of the panel, and the available options for the set appears actually on the right side of the panel. And then click the checkbox to the left of the options set to enable or disable the options without viewing them. How to import brushes and brush packs? How to import brushes and brush packs? By the way, you can import a wide variety of free and brushes. For example, Kelly's Photoshop brush packs into Photoshop, and follow these steps now. Note, we have step number 1. In the brushes panel, from the flyout menu, you should choose get more brushes, and alternatively right click a brush listed in the brushes panel and then select get more brushes from the contextual menu. Like this screenshot now. This image now is explained for you how to select the brushes and get more brushes from here now, and get more brushes from the brushes panel flyout menu. And right click in this image now. You should to right click a brush and select get more brushes. And step number 2, you should to download a brush pack. For example, download Kilos and Mega Pack. Step number 3, with Photoshop running, double click the downloaded ABR file, and the brushes you added are now displayed in the brushes panel, by the way. And not here in this point. You can also use the import brushes option in the brush panel flyout menu to locate the downloaded ABR file and open it once you do so. The downloaded brushes are added to the brushes panel. Getting started with advanced custom brushes. How to create a brush tip from an image. We have steps again. Step number 1. You should to using the area selection tool, and then select the image area you want to use as a custom brush. And the brush shape can be up to 2500 pixels by 2500 pixels in size. And when painting, you can't adjust the hardness of sampled brushes. And to create a brush with sharp edges, set feather to 0 pixels, and to create a brush with soft edges, increase the feather setting. And note here in this point, if you select a color image, the brush tip image, by the way, is converted to grayscale, and any layer mask applied to the image doesn't affect the definition of the brush tip. Step number 2, you should choose edit, then you choose define brush preset. Step number 3, name the brush and then click OK. how to create a brush and set painting options. How to create a brush and set painting options. We have steps again. Step number 1, you should select a painting firstly, and erasing and toning and on focus tool, and then choose Windows and then choose brush setting. Step number 2, in the brush setting panel, you should select a brush type, shape, or click brush presets to choose an existing preset. Step number 3, you should select the brush type shape on the left side and set options. Step number 4, to set other options for the brush, see the following topics. You should add dynamic elements to brushes, or brush scattering, or create textured brushes, and color dynamics brush options, and draw or paint with a graphic tablet. Step number 5, to lock brush tip shape attributes and retaining them if you select another brush preset, and then click the unlock icon to unlock the tip, and then click the lock icon. Step number 6, to save the brush for use later, you should choose new brush preset from the brush panel menu, and note here in this point, to save your new brush permanently or distribute it to other users, you must save the brush as part of a set of brushes, and then choose save brushes from the brush presets panel menu, and then save to a new set or overwrite an existing set. And if you reset or replace the brushes in the brush presets panel without saving it in a set, you could lose your new brush, by the way. So what about standard brush tip shape options? What about standard brush tip shape options? For standard brush shapes, you can set the following options in the brush setting panel, by the way. We have a size. Size is meaning controls the size of the brushes of the brush. Enter a value in pixels or drag the slider. And brush strokes with different with different diameters values. You can't use sample size. Use sample size is meaning that resets the brush to its original diameters, and this option, by the way, is available only if the brush tip shape was created by sampling pixels in an image. And what about flip X? Flip X meaning it changes the direction of a brush tip on its x-axis. Like this screenshot now. We have A and B and C images. And A is meaning and flipping a brush tip on its x-axis. A is meaning brush tip in its default position. And B is meaning flip X selected. And C is meaning flip X and flip Y selected. And flip Y is meaning changes the direction of a brush tip on its y-axis. And we have flipping a brush tip on its y-axis. So what about angle? Angle is meaning specifies the angle by which an elliptical or sampled brush's long axis is rotated from horizontal, and type a value in degrees or drag the horizontal axis in the preview box, like this screenshot now. This image now explain for you. Angled brushes create a chiseled stroke. So what about roundness? Roundness is meaning specifies the ratio between the brush short and long axis, and enter a percentage value or drag the points in the preview box, and a value of 100% indicates a circular brush, and a value of 0% indicates a linear brush, and intermediate values indicate elliptical brushes, like this screenshot. Look at this picture now. Adjusting roundness to compress a brush tip shape. And hardness. What about hardness? Hardness is meaning controls the size of the brush's hard center. And type a number or use the slider to enter a value that is a percentage of the brush diameter. And you can't change the hardness of sampled brushes, by the way. Look at this image now. Brush strokes with different hardness value. And what about spacing? Spacing is meaning controls the distance between the brush mark in a stroke. To change the spacing, type a number or use the slider to enter a value that is a percentage of the brush diameter. And when this option, by the way, is deselected, the speed of the cursor determines the spacing. And look at this image now. Increasing the spacing makes the brush skip. And while using a preset brush, press the key to decrease the brush width and press the key to increase the width for hard round, soft round, and calligraphic brush. Press shift plus to decrease the brush hardness and press shift plus to increase the brush hardness again. So what about Bristol? Bristol tip shape options. Bristol tip shape options is meaning Bristol tips less use specify precise Bristol characteristics, creating highly realistic and natural looking strokes. And this is the following brush tip shape options in the brush panel. We have many options here now. The first option is shape. Shape is meaning determines the overall arrangement of bristles. A shape is meaning determines the overall arrangement of bristles, and bristles is meaning controls overall bristle density, and length is meaning changes bristle length, and thickness is meaning controls the width of individual bristles. Thickness is meaning controls the width of individual bristles, and stiffness is meaning controls bristle flexibility. At low setting brush shape deforms easily. And to vary stroke creation when using a mouse, adjust the stiffness setting. So what about spacing? Spacing is meaning controls the distance between the brush marks in a stroke. To change the spacing and type and number, or use the slider to specify a percentage of the brush diameter. And when this option actually is deselected, the speed of the cursor determines the spacing, by the way. And so what about angle? Angle is meaning when painting with a mouse, determines the brush tip angle. So what about brush preview? Brush preview is meaning shows brush tip that reflects changes to setting above, and as well as current pressure and stroke angle, and then click the preview window to see the brush from different sides. And what about irritable tip options? Irritable tip options is meaning irritable tip brushes behave similar to pencils and crayons and wear down naturally as you draw, and you can see the amount of wear with the live brush tip preview to the upper left of the image, by the way. And what about size? Size is meaning controls size is meaning controls the size of the brush and enter a value in pixels or drag the slider. So what about softness? Softness is meaning that controls the rate of wear and enter a value in percentage or drag the slider. So what about shape? A shape is meaning that controls the shape of the type and choose from a variety of tip options. And what about sharpen tip? Sharpen tip is meaning returns the tip to the original sharpness. And what about spacing? Spacing is meaning controls the distance between the brush marks in a stroke. To change the spacing and type and number, or use the slider to specify a percentage of the brush diameter. And when this option actually is deselected, the speed of the cursor determines the spacing. So what about brush preview? Brush preview is meaning shows brush tip that reflects changes to setting above, and as well as current pressure and stroke angle. Click the preview window to see the brush from different sides. And what's the meaning of airbrush tip options? Airbrush tip options is meaning that airbrush tips replicate spray cans with a 3D conical spray. And with a stylus, you can alter the spread of spread strokes by changing pen pressure. And what's the meaning of size? Size is meaning controls the size of the brush and enter a value in pixels or drag the slider. And what about hardness? Hardness is meaning that controls the size of the brush's hard center. And distortion. What's the meaning of distortion? It's meaning controls the distortion to apply to the spray of paint. And what's the meaning of granularity? Granularity is meaning controls how grainy the paint drops look. And what's the meaning of spatter size? It's meaning that controls the size of the paint droplets. And what's the meaning of spatter amount? Spatter amount is meaning controls the number of paint droplets. And what's the meaning of spacing? Spacing is meaning controls the distance between the droplets, and if this option is deselected, the speed of the cursor determines the spacing, by the way. And what about brush preview? Brush preview is meaning shows brush tip that reflects changes to setting above and as well as current pressure and stroke angle. Click the preview window to see the brush from different sides. And what's the meaning of brush both options? What about brush both options? Brush both options is meaning brush both options lets you achieve styles like effects and let you control the angle and the position of the brush. And you have options here. Tilt X. Tilt X is meaning determines the tilt angle of the brush from left to right. And Tilt Y is meaning determines the tilt angle of the brush from front to back. And what about rotation? Rotation is meaning determines the rotation angle of the bristles. And what's the meaning of pressure? It's meaning determines the pressure the brush applies on the canvas. And enable override options to maintain a static brush pose. And what about other brush options? Other brush options, like we have many options here, like noise and like wet edges and like airbrush and like smoothing and like protect texture. Noise is meaning adds additional randomness to individual brush tips. This option, by the way, is most effective when applied to soft bar brush tips and the brush tips that contain gray values. And what about wet edges? Wet edges is meaning that causes paint to build up along the edges of the brush stroke and creating a watercolor effect. And what about airbrush and build up? Airbrush and build up is meaning applies gradual tones to an image and simulating traditional airbrush techniques. And the airbrush option in the brush panel corresponds to the airbrush option in the option bar, by the way. And what about smoothing? Smoothing is meaning produces smoother curves in brush strokes. This option, by the way, is most effective when you are painting quickly with a stylus. However, it may produce a slight lag time in stroke rendering. And what's the meaning of protect texture? Protect texture is meaning applies the same pattern and scale to all brush bristles that have a texture. And select this option, by the way, to simulate a consistent canvas texture when painting with multiple textured brush tips. And what about stroke smoothing? Stroke smoothing is meaning that Photoshop performs, by the way, Photoshop performs intelligent smoothing on your brush strokes. And simply enter a value between 0 to 100 for smoothing in the options bar. And when you are working with one of the following tools, brush and pencil and mixer, brush or eraser, a value, by the way, of 0 is the same as legacy smoothing in earlier versions of Photoshop, and higher values apply increasing amounts of intelligent smoothing to your strokes. And stroke smoothing works in several modes, by the way, and clicking the gear icon to enable one or more of the following modes. So what about bold string mode? Bold string mode is meaning paints only when the string is touched, and cursor movements within the smoothing radius leave no mark. And what about stroke catch up? Stroke catch up is meaning allows the paint to continue catching up with your cursor while you have pushed the stroke, and disabling this mode stops paint application as soon as the cursor movement stops. And what about catch up on stroke end? Catch up on stroke end is meaning completes the stroke from the last paint position to the point where you released the mouse and stylus control. And what's the meaning of adjust for zoom? Adjust for zoom is meaning prevents jittery strokes by adjusting smoothing, and decreases smoothing when you zoom in the document, and increases smoothing when you zoom out, like the next image now. Eraser 50% smoothing. So what about brush scattering? Brush scattering is meaning brush scattering determines the number and the placement of marks in a stroke, like this image. This screenshot now, this image now in the left side explain for you brush strokes without scattering, and in the right side with scattering, with and without. And what about scatter and control? Scatter and control is meaning specifies how brush marks are distributed in a stroke. And when both axis is selected, brush marks, by the way, are distributed in a radial direction. And when both axis is deselected, brush marks, by the way, are distributed perpendicular to the stroke path. And to specify the maximum percentage of scattering, enter a value to specify how you want to control the scattering variance of brush marks. And choose an option from the control pop-up menu. We have many options here. Off. What's the meaning of off? Off is meaning specifies no control. No control over the scattering variance of brush marks, by the way. Fade. Fade is meaning fades the scattering of brush marks from maximum scattering to no scattering in the specified number of steps. What's the meaning of beam pressure, pen tilt, and stylus wheel and rotation? Its meaning varies. The scattering of brush marks based on the pen pressure and pen tilt and the position of the pen thumb wheel or rotation of the pen. What's the meaning of count? Count is meaning specifies the number of brush marks applied at each spacing interval. And note in this point, if you increase the count without increasing the spacing or scattering values, painting performance may decrease, by the way. And what about count, jitter, and control? Count, jitter, and control is meaning specifies how the number of brush marks varies for each spacing interval. And to specify the maximum percentage of brush marks applied at each spacing interval, and enter a value to specify how you want to control the count variance of brush marks, by the way. And then choose an option from the control pop-up menu. And what's the meaning of off again? Off again is meaning specifies no control over the count variance of brush marks again. And what's the meaning of fade again? Fade is meaning fades the number of brush marks from the count value to 1 in the specified number of steps. And what's the meaning of pen pressure again, and pen tilt and stylus wheel rotation? Its meaning varies the number of brush marks based on the pen pressure and pen tilt position of the pen thumb wheel or rotation of the pen. How to clear brush options? How to clear brush options? By the way, you can clear all options that you changed for a brush preset and escape brush shape setting at once. And you should choose clear brush controls from the brush setting panel menu. Like this screenshot now. Brush setting panel. You should choose from this brush setting panel now clear brush controls. If you would like to clear brush controls, you should clear brush controls from brush setting panel. Yes.